Hello, this is David Sloan Wilson for Evolution, This View of Life, the magazine that approaches anything and everything from an evolutionary perspective. I am delighted to be talking with Daniel T. Blumstein. Hello, Daniel.
Hey, how are you going?
I'm doing great, and we are welcoming you as the new editor of the biology section of Evolution, This View of Life. And Daniel, let me list some of your accomplishments, even if it makes you blush before we get started here. You are the chair of the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UCLA, also a professor at the Institute of Environment and Sustainability. Your background is in animal behavior, and you remain solidly rooted in animal behavior, but you've also branched out in a number of directions. You are the author of a primer of conservation behavior, something that I look forward to talking with you about. Another book called The Failure of Environmental Education, a fascinating book titled Eating Our Way to Civility, which I'm eager to talk with you about. You are past editor of the journal Animal Behavior and current editor of the new journal Evolutionary Medicine and Public Health. You are involved in other books such as Natural Security, which includes Rafe Sagarin, the editor of our Environment section, and Dominique Johnson, the editor of our Politics section, and author of Quantifying Behavior the Jaywatcher Way. That involves the development of a event recorder, basically, that can be widely available so that we can all quantify behavior. And on top of all of that, you have decided to be biology editor of Evolution, This View of Life, and I thank you very much for that.
I'm excited to be part of the team.
Now, let's begin a little bit with your own research. Tell us what you do as an animal behaviorist, and then we can branch out from there.
Well, I think from that you sort of get the idea that I have broad interests, but I'm interested in the evolution and maintenance of social behavior, of communication, of anti-predator behavior, and then I'm also very interested in taking these general ideas and applying them to lots of things and thinking about consilience of ideas, really. So I spend an inordinate amount of time looking at and listening to and studying marmots, which are big ground squirrels. Groundhog Day, one of the 14 species of marmots. We all celebrate Groundhog Day. It's the only holiday named after an animal, by the way. It doesn't count. So, and I also do a lot with birds and other things.
Right, and so actually, right after this interview, you'll be interviewed by BBC on some of your most recent research on the smell of fear. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Sound of fear.
Sound of fear. Excuse me.
This is a fun one. When you sort of spend 2 long hours, sitting in alpine meadows listening to marmots and looking at marmots, you start thinking about things. Go a little crazy in the sun, I think. But in any event, what I discovered a number of years ago with yellow-bellied marmots is that every once in a while when we catch a baby marmot about 10 days after it emerges from its natal burrow where it's born, they scream. And it's a horrible scream. First time I heard it, I thought I broke it and wanted to drop it. I didn't drop it, and I didn't break it, and I didn't hurt the baby. But its mom came up and looked at me, and other animals pay attention to this. And I responded to this in a very emotional way, which I thought was interesting. So I started, Darwin knew nothing about marmots. If you read all of Darwin, you look in these online compendia of words and that are used by Darwin. Darwin didn't know marmots, but Darwin did know what screams were, and he said that screams were cries from young to recruit help from their parents. Turns out screams aren't only given by young; they're given by animals in severe duress. Although right now we've only heard baby marmots scream, so sometimes babies scream. And the question is, if you start listening to these things, they sound really similar. This probably is not convergence. It probably reflects a functional constraint on how these screams are produced in a variety of taxa. And basically, they can be produced by overblowing a vocal production system. So the same way you turn up your stereo and it gets louder and louder and then it gets distorted, if you put too much air through your lungs, if you're a mammal, and through your syrinx or through your vocal cords, or you put too much air through your syrinx, if you're a bird, you're going to overblow that and you're going to create distorted sounds. These distorted sounds are really evocative in lots of animals. Turns out they're evocative to us too. So I was giving a popular talk about this, and I bet this applies to soundtracks and Hollywood and music. And a guy came up to me afterwards, Peter Kay. He is a he's a film score composer and a musician, and he has been studying sort of the biological basis of why we respond to music and images and video the way we do. And he said, I think you're right. And I said, let's collaborate. So we did. So we looked at a whole bunch of films and scored films based on what high-ranked horror films, high-ranked sad dramatic films, etc. And then we sort of looked at 30-second snippets and said, okay, well, let's try to not look for these non-linearities, if you will, but let's look for what we might call simulated non-linearities, noise, rapid frequency changes, and some other things acoustically. And we did. And what we found was that, surprise, surprise, noise and noisy screams and things like that were found more than would be expected in horror films, and less than would be expected in sad dramatic films.
Okay, great.
So that's correlative. So then we said, okay, one of my colleagues on campus is Greg Bryant. He's a professor in communication studies at UCLA. He studies humans. I don't know how to study humans. He knows how to study humans. He's also a musician, and he also studies, how emotions are communicated. And I said, great, let's collaborate. Let's scare some people. So we did. And Biology Letters published the first salvo from this collaboration this week, which shows that Peter and Greg got together and made some music, composed some music, and we broadcast music to people alone or embedded in 10-second videos. And we have, Muzak-y benign stuff, and then we added specific types of nonlinearities to these, including noise, and we increased our perceptions of arousal and modified perceptions of valence, how positive or negative things were. And that's interesting because this is biologically inspired music. We listened to our inner marmot and we made some music that was biologically, evolutionarily inspired, really.
Right.
And it changes how people self-report about emotion. It gets even more interesting and a little more complex, because when we embedded that music in little benign little video clips, we attenuated the interpretation, the emotional response.
Right.
Now that's interesting because one of my other projects I'm doing right now is looking at, with one of my graduate students, Nicole Muniz, is looking at and developing ways of generally thinking about how and why we see rules emerge from how multiple modalities are integrated. Right. So I'm looking at you now, I'm moving, you're moving, that's one modality, that's a visual modality. I'm speaking, that's another modality. We don't have the olfactory modality going down in our communication right now because we're across the country from each other. Right. So the question is, how are these different modalities bound in the brain?
Yeah, there's dominance. I've read about that. So, for example, in a movie theater, the sound is coming from speakers, but there's visual dominance, and so you actually think that the sound is coming from the mouths of the people on the screen.
Exactly, and I think visual dominance explains our attenuated result because we designed really, benign video clips, if you will, really silly things, benign things that people were doing, and that seemed to have overpowered the emotional response to the music alone. Take-home message is, first, we used biological algorithms, if you will, to design music that can influence emotion. And the second one is context is everything in communication, and context is important in emotional perception. Next thing we're going to do is wire people up. Got a little money to buy some physiological monitoring packs, and the thing after that we want to do is put people in tubes. MRI.
There's something very boyish about the way you describe this. I can imagine you as a kid doing something like this, but it would be just a little bit different.
No, I was always nice to animals.
Talk to us a little bit in your capacity as chair of a whole department of ecology and evolutionary biology about what's been happening trend-wise in the field of evolutionary biology. Can you do that for a few minutes?
I can, and I think a lot's happening. I think the genomic revolution is really important in many ways because it's giving us tools to ask fundamental questions we've never really been able to ask about evolution and natural selection. It's giving us tools to look at the geography of adaptation and the rates of adaptation in ways we haven't before. I also think there's a bit of peril associated with this because it captures all of the attention. We haven't solved all of the world's problems by sequencing things, although we're getting new insights into mechanisms by doing this. I think the fundamental logic of evolution, the fundamental logic of studying diversity has to be at the forefront of our evolutionary studies, and much as people who are probably watching this, people that are reading the magazine, people that are broadly interested in the logic of evolution, the logic of evolution is quite powerful, and the logic of ecology and ecological rules is quite powerful. So I think that we are at a stage right now where we have an amazing toolkit. The prices are becoming affordable for people like us to do things we never really imagined we could do before, but the logic should be at the forefront driving all of these questions.
Well, and I'm going to lob you a softball here because I know that you're probably going to agree with this 100%. One, the centrality of field studies, and number two, the centrality of behavior. And the reason that's important is that both of those fields have become marginalized compared to the such things as molecular biology. And that's a shame. That's an imbalance. That's the way I think of it. But you might be able to say that even more effectively than I tried to.
Well, I mean, I think there's always an issue of losing maybe more lower tech fields. I mean, I spend time sitting in meadows listening to animals, but I'm trying to come up with generalizable rules. You have to look for these rules, and I think we need to study a diversity of species in order to find these rules, to build them up from the bottom, from empirical observations. However, the flip side of that is I'm having a meeting later today with a colleague who we probably are going to be collaborating more on RNA expression, and we're going to be doing that with marmots to give us new tools to ask really interesting questions about costs and benefits of sociality. So, I think there's a lot of opportunities for field biologists. We don't want to put our head in the sand per se, but the respect doesn't always go both ways.
Well, I mean, I see this as a fulfillment of Nico Tinbergen's 4 Questions, his classic paper in 1963.
Yep, 50 years is next year, and I think that I certainly do Tinbergian science. I think that Tinbergian science, or what I might call integrative studies of animal behavior, are more enabled, empowered, and exciting than ever before. And it really is about wanting to ask those questions. But the 4 questions really set you on a stage to looking at a phenomena of interest from different perspectives, and it leads to a rich understanding of that phenomena of interest.
And actually, we might schedule a second interview to do a tutorial on Tinbergen's 4 Questions. That's part of our lore, but not everyone knows what Tinbergen's 4 Questions are, and it would be nice to actually get that out there as part of what the magazine does. Well, I know you got to go, so tell us some of the things that you have in mind. What do you intend to feature on Evolution, This View of Life, and how do you see the magazine as kind of an important vehicle of communication? And let me do that at 2 levels, because the thing I've discovered about the magazine is that it's functioning in a very interesting way at the professional level, that some of the debates that are taking place amongst the experts need to be done in a forum such as, not just in the academic journals, but in a public forum such as the magazine. So what are some of the really exciting debates that you see taking place amongst the experts, and how else would you like to use the magazine just to educate and entertain the general public on some of these great issues?
Well, I mean, you mentioned earlier that I'm a colleague with Rafe and with Dominic Johnson, and we're working together creating a field of natural security. I think that part of this education is that you can use this evolutionary and ecological toolkit to begin, as you have and many others have, to ask questions that apply to a diversity of topics. And that's one of the things that I find exciting about the magazine, and that's one of the things that I'd like to look for and highlight. In terms of debates, some people certainly question whether you can, the validity of using these sorts of things. We can debate that, we can discuss that, or we can just illustrate how it may or may not be useful in certain cases. Often it's hard. From a national security perspective, it's easy to come up, I think, with high-level prescriptions, but it's very difficult to provide a lower level prescription, an actionable item. But that's really no different than the field of Darwinian medicine, which I'm also sort of peripherally involved at UCLA, at least. We're trying to put together a Darwinian an evolutionary medicine program. And here, adding function and functional thought to something that has typically been addressed at a very proximate level. I don't want a physician who's a card-carrying evolutionist. I want a physician who's going to solve my problems. But if medical research can stimulate new questions and new therapies based on a deep functional understanding, that's the sort of stuff that I want to churn and create and facilitate. So I think that there are debates and discussions about the utility. I think that the consilience of evolutionary ecological laws, principles, ideas to solving things in life is what excites me about the magazine and excites me about the dialogue that you've started to create.
Well, great. And, so often what grabs attention is the human applications of evolution nowadays. But evolution will always be centered in the biological sciences. And I'm so happy that you're joining us with your energy to showcase basically all the tremendous stuff that's taking place in biology, in addition to the wonderful human applications. You will be joined by Catherine Bowers as an associate editor, someone that you recruited, and she's a gifted science writer and co-author of the new book Zubiquity, which is currently much in the news. And so you're going to make a great team, and I certainly look forward to interacting with you more and featuring the material that you generate on Evolution, This View of Life.
Well, Catherine's great, and we spend a lot of time talking, and she's reading the literature deeply, has a deep knowledge, understanding, appreciation of evolution, natural history, factoids, putting things together. She should have a PhD in animal behavior from my perspective. Great. But she's also a gifted communicator.
Awesome. And so you are speaking to the BBC. You're going to be participating in graduation ceremonies as chairperson, and then you're going to be heading off into the field. Is that right?
That's about right. It's a hectic couple days right now.
Well, I hope you got a little bit of relaxation in the field, although I know that field biologists don't often think that way, right?
No, it's a pretty intense time, but it's a fun time.
Yeah, it's all fun. So thanks so much, and we'll sign off now, but we look forward to seeing you again on the pages of Evolution, This View of Life.
Thanks, David.
See you later.
Bye.